Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Max Story.
Hello, and thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast today. So I just realized that I released a book last year in 2021, my latest book, and just realized I haven't really shared about it on my podcast. So I'm going to do this episode. I'm going to talk about that book. That book's titled Blue Collar Leadership Toolbox Tips, and it's not a regular book, meaning the pages are not full and it's not chapter after chapter after chapter. This is a book that I wrote for individuals to use to develop themselves, especially those people who maybe don't like to read books, regular books, or big thick books. But it's also a tool that leaders can use. Some of our best clients, they get these books and they kick off a daily or a weekly leadership tip. They do it for 60 days or 60 weeks because the subtitle of Blue Collar Leadership Toolbox Tips, the subtitle is 60 Micro Lessons to Maximize Your Influence. And these lessons are taken from two of my regular books, Blue Collar Leadership Leading from the Front Lines and Blue Collar Leadership and Teamwork, 30 Traits of High Impact Players. So those two books each have 30 chapters. They each have 30 chapters that are 3 pages each. So they're easy to read themselves on purpose, and they're great for book studies. Lots of our clients use those books for book studies, and they're also easy reads. They're 90-page books. But what I did was those two books, Blue Collar Leadership is really about developing yourself to become a high impact individual, and in Blue Collar Leadership and Teamwork is filled with principles and lessons on how to become a high impact team player, because there's a difference between working well alone and working well with others. So first you got to be able to work well by yourself as an individual and be the kind of person that people want to work with, the kind of person that leaders want to promote. And then also you want to become the kind of person that works well with others, meaning you can accomplish the mission with and through others because they want to work with you and you want to work with them. So what Blue Collar Leadership Toolbox Tips is, if you noticed a minute ago, I said 60 micro lessons to maximize your influence. That's the subtitle. So these 60 micro lessons are based on those 60 chapters from those two books. It's not a repeat though. So if you've read the books, this book is not a repeat of what you got in those chapters, but it's based on the primary principle in each chapter. So I'm going to give you examples. I'm going to actually read to you and cover six of the lessons out of the 60 today. And you also, just go ahead and give you a heads up right now, you can go to bluecollarleadership.com/download, DOWNLOAD, and actually download these 6 chapters, an outline of the book and these 6 chapters, word for word, that I'm going to cover with you today. And you can actually read it or share it with your team or give it a test drive, see what you think about it, or teach those 6 lessons to your team and discuss it. So, but real quick, let me just talk about, Blue Collar Leadership Toolbox Tips. It's the ultimate tool for developing leaders at every level in a fast, simple, and effective way. And you remember, when I talk about leadership, everybody's a leader. So when I say develop leaders at every level, I mean every level. Upper level leaders could cover this in a staff meeting amongst the big dogs. They could cover, every time they have a meeting, they could cover 1 or 2 of these micro lessons out of here to provoke thought, to get the leaders' minds engaged with leadership development personally, because that's what this book is about. It's about personal development. It's meant to raise your level of awareness and provoke thought in little simple ways. You're going to see each lesson is only 2 pages, but again, the 2 pages are not full of words, because I've got about uh, 5 or 6 little paragraphs in there. And again, I'm gonna cover it with you, so I don't want to do that now, but I just want you to know it takes you about 45 seconds to a minute to cover one of these lessons. So a frontline supervisor, let's say I'm a supervisor of a crew of 10 or 20 people. I'm running a department in my plant, or I'm leading a work crew out on a construction site, that sort of thing. So once a week or once a day, at the startup in the morning or the evening, whatever time you're working, when you start your shift, you could cover one of these lessons. It'd be best if everybody had a book so they could reflect on it. And I got an area in each chapter where you can actually, each lesson, there's room for you to write your thoughts. So it's better if each person had a book, but they don't have to have the book. Just the leader could have the book. They could read the micro lesson, and then they could get on with their work, or they could read the lesson and they could actually talk about it. So you can quickly develop leaders in little micro sessions. It's the drip. If you've heard me talk about leaders need to always keep the drip going, meaning don't just have an event or send someone to a conference or bring someone in like me to speak, and you do that once a year or twice a year and that's all you ever do. You got to keep the drip going. That's why we have so many clients do book studies. But this is an even smaller drip than the book study. But and the reason is leaders are busy. And that's why I designed Toolbox Tips, which is a collection of powerful leadership principles delivered in short and easy to understand format for quick, and this is important. That's important too, quick, but also consistent workforce development. It's not just for formal authority leaders, and it's not just for the frontline entry level workforce. It's for both. But it's really, really intended to be used for the developing the frontline workforce. But the content applies to everyone. But the way I created it was so leaders could just keep that drip going real simple. Or individual frontline workers may discover this book and they just want to buy it for themselves and use it as a resource to grow and develop themselves. But again, you can kick off weekly meetings by reviewing a toolbox tip on responsibility, start your safety meetings with a toolbox tip on trust, or begin your management team meeting with a toolbox tip on character. Or you could do any of these in any of these locations. But I'm just giving you some examples. That's what these 60 micro lessons, they're on things like responsibility, trust, character, all these sort of things. But you can leverage the power of micro learning with these powerful common sense leadership principles. Again, quickly and consistently, you can review and discuss and apply the toolbox tips to create a leadership culture filled with high impact individuals, team players, and high impact leaders worth following. That's what the book is for, to help facilitate developing a high performance team within a high impact culture. So when you keep the drip going, that's what creates that culture. A high impact culture that you really want to be a part of, there's always a drip. There's drips happening all throughout the organization. But this book's basically, it's dedicated to those who have a strong desire to intentionally climb to the next level and beyond. So let's get into these micro lessons and give you an example about what these tips are, what some of the tips look like. But again, let me just say before I do that, Blue Collar Leadership Toolbox Tips filled with 60 micro lessons intended to provoke thought and raise awareness. Remember that. That's what it's for. That's why it applies to anybody. You can provoke thought in anyone, and you can raise awareness in anyone. The key as you listen to these lessons today is hopefully I'm going to provoke thought within you and raise your level of awareness. But don't let it just be me on this podcast. You could order the book and do it yourself. If you're a formal authority leader, you could order multiple books, do it with your team. But the main thing is to realize if you want to have a better team or you want to get better yourself, it's exactly what you got to do. You got to get better. So these micro lessons can be studied alone or introduced in a team or group setting to initiate growth and facilitate discussion. You don't have to have discussion, but you can. Each micro lessons, again, I mentioned before, they can be read in 45 seconds to a minute, 1 to 2 minutes at the max, because they're short. They're intended not to take up much time, so people will actually do it. But I still encourage group discussion, which is going to add more time, and you have to decide what that'll be. But again, you don't have to do that. The main thing is do something, especially if you're doing nothing at this point. This is a great place to start. But each micro lesson begins with a principle that if applied, is going to help you increase your influence. And what you have to remember is life is always better with more influence, not less. And as you read each micro lesson in this book, look for ways to validate, reinforce what you're learning. And you do this by reflecting on times when you or others got it right and gained influence, or times when you or others got it wrong and lost influence. So the first section in the book, as I mentioned, the first 30 micro lessons based on my book, Blue Collar Leadership Leading from the Front Lines. The second section, or the second 30, the last 30 micro lessons, again, based on blue collar leadership and teamwork. 30 traits of high impact players. But high impact people are always more valuable, more effective, and more influential. And high performance teams are filled with high impact people. So I'm challenging you to be more. You want more out of life, you need to be more. So what I want to do right now, I want to dive into these 6 tips. I got about 20 minutes or so left in this podcast, so I'm going to break it down. I'm going to cover these 6 tips. Again, you don't probably need to do 6 at a time for any reason. Even if you're doing it on your own, I'd recommend spread this. If you're doing it on your own, spread it out over 60 days. Read 1 tip a day and think about it on purpose. Go slower and deeper into each tip. If you're leading a team, I would not recommend sharing more than 1 tip per day. Some people may only do it once a week, but I would say 1 per day. Again, you're only talking about a couple of minutes if there's no discussion involved. So let's get started. I've picked the first tip from each group, a middle tip from each section, I should say, the first 30. I got the first tip number 1, tip number 15, and tip number 30. And then I got in section 2, I got tip 31, tip 45, tip 60. So you see, I'm just giving you the first, the middle, and the last from each section, just so you can kind of have a feel for how the content goes. First thing I'm going to do, we're going to cover toolbox tip number 1. I'm going to give you the tip at the top. It's just 1 or 2 sentences. And then there's going to be 6 sections after that in each one of them. One section is why it matters. So why does that tip matter? What we do if we're applying that tip. What we don't do, which means it's kind of like the opposite. It's what we don't want to do if we're trying to apply that tip. And then there's a bad example, which really means is someone who's getting it wrong relative to that tip. And then I've got to think about this section, which is a quote. Most of them are from someone else. Some of them are from me, but it's just a text box, a quote, just to provoke some thought on something intentionally related to the tip. And then there's an ask yourself section where I ask you a couple of questions to provoke thought about the tip. And then at the end, there's a what do you think section, which is blank, which is where you can actually write and take notes when you're thinking and reflecting on that tip. And I would say think about when you got it wrong, when you got it right. If you apply that tip, how will your influence increase? If you do the opposite, which is the section on what we don't do, how will your influence decrease? So let's get started. Toolbox tip number 1. Who we are matters. We should give credit to others when things go right and take responsibility when things go wrong. Why it matters. We build trust and increase our influence with others when we have the personal integrity to take responsibility when things go wrong and the security to give credit when things go right. What we do, we look for opportunities to intentionally give others credit when things go right. We look for opportunities to take responsibility when things go wrong by asking, how could I have prevented this from happening? What we don't do, we don't seek credit when things go right. We don't look for others to blame when things go wrong. And bad example, we give credit to others publicly, but we seek credit for ourselves privately. We take the blame publicly, but blame others privately. Think about this. No amount of personal competency can compensate for personal insecurity. That's a quote from Wayne Smith. So ask yourself, what would cause me to take credit when things go right? What would cause me to blame others when things go wrong? And then the last section, what do you think? So what you just heard, that was Toolbox tip number 1. I read it word for word. That's how long it takes to cover a tip. So you realize you could, if you're doing it yourself, now you would just reflect on it. You'd think on it as you go through. You'd make notes at the end. You're developing yourself. You're raising your own level of awareness. You don't need someone else to do it. You're going to do it. Or again, you take this, you read just like I just read it. You read it to your team. Or you could do it at home with your family, especially if you got teenagers, or with your spouse and your family, with your teenage children. Read this, do a book study with your family, and help them grow and develop themselves as leaders. Because everything in this Toolbox tip book is intended to help you increase your influence, which makes you become a higher level leader. So I'm going to go through the other 5. I'm just going to read them like this. I may go back and take this book and do podcast lessons on it, but it'd be real easy for me to do each section and then talk about each section and elaborate on it and turn it each lesson could be turned into an entire podcast episode. And I may do that one day, but that's not what today's about. Let's look at Toolbox tip number 15. Character counts. Who we are on the inside determines what others see, feel, and experience on the outside. Why it matters? When it comes to character, it's not about what we know. It's about who we are. People are most often hired for what they know, but they are most often fired for who they are. Our character will either launch us or limit us. Character is personal, but it's not private. What we do, we intentionally make choices that reveal a high degree of character. We make and keep commitments. We do what we said we would do, when we said we would do it, how we said we would do it, because we said we would do it. We ensure our motive, agenda, and behavior are aligned with positive, character-based principles. We say and do things that build trust. What we don't do, we don't lie, we don't make and break commitments, we don't talk about others behind their backs, we don't fail to stand for what's right, we don't hang around negative people, we don't do or say things that create distrust. Bad example, blaming others for our behavior when things don't go our way. Speaking to others in anger, pretending to know when we don't know, allowing our pride and ego to prevent us from doing the right thing. Think about this. Our reputations do not come from how we talk about ourselves. Our reputations come from how others talk about us. And that quote was from Simon Sinek. So ask yourself, do I ever blame others for my behavior? Do others control me, or do I control me? Who is responsible for my behavior? What does my behavior communicate to others? And again, you have the last section. What do you think for your notes? So you've just covered that again. As you listen to this podcast, you can pause and think about each section as I go through it. You can also obviously rewind it, go through it again. I'm just simply covering these tips so you can get a feel for what this book's about. And again, I hope you invest in the book to invest in developing yourself, especially if you have a team. Maybe you need to get a leader's approval to purchase these books for you and your team, or maybe you have authority to do that yourself. Maybe you guys have never done any formal leadership development training. Maybe nobody has even valued doing that. This little book may be the introduction to you and your team where you can create some hunger and you can start a leadership growth journey with those folks inside your organization. At a minimum, do it with yourself. Toolbox tip number 30. We must bet on ourselves. If we won't bet on ourselves, why should anyone else? Why it matters? People who believe in themselves have more influence than those who don't. A better tomorrow won't just happen. We must be intentional and make it happen. Living intentionally leads to amazing results. Living accidentally leads to depressing disappointments. What we do, we take educated risks. We take chances not because we are foolish, but because we have prepared for the next level. We believe in ourselves and our abilities. We make things happen. We move forward on purpose for a purpose. What we don't do, we don't take risk for the sake of taking risk. We don't gamble and take random chances. We don't attempt to move forward without preparing in advance. A bad example, failing to pay the price to get to the next level. Failing to make the sacrifices that will take us to the next level. Being undisciplined and flowing with the current instead of charting our own course. Think about this. To grow, you must be willing to let your present and your future be totally unlike your past. Your history is not your destiny. That quote was from Alan Cohen. The last section, ask yourself, do I truly believe in myself? What would others say? Why? What does my behavior reveal? Am I already intentionally traveling down a path I designed, or am I traveling down the path of chance and random opportunity? And again, the last section, literally, what do you think? You got to take your own notes there. So we've quickly covered the first three toolbox tips in this podcast episode. Again, they were number 1, 15, and 30 from Blue Collar Leadership, Leading from the Front Lines. That book is what those 3 tips are based on, again, just to remind you. All right. Toolbox tip number 31. Now we're shifting into tips that are based on the book, Blue Collar Leadership and Teamwork. Toolbox tip number 31. We should be growth-oriented, not goal-oriented. Why it matters? Constant growth creates freedom and options. Life is always better with more freedom and more options. When we're goal-oriented, we may reach the goal and quit growing. When we quit growing, we should expect to be left behind by those who are still growing. What we do. When we're growth-oriented, we set goals and facilitate constant growth. When we reach a goal, we automatically set a new goal that will help us continue climbing to the next level and beyond. What we don't do. We don't set a goal, reach it, and begin resting on our past growth. We don't go with the status quo. We don't rest on what we did 1, 5, 10, or 20 years ago. We don't coast. Bad example, we graduate high school or college and never read another book. We only grow when others require us to grow. Think about this. The vast majority of us now work in environments where the ability to learn is more critical than what we know, and where the most valuable currency is influence, not power. That quote is from Liz Wiseman. Ask yourself, if I'm not growth oriented, how can I expect to compete with someone who is? Am I growth oriented? Why or why not? How will this impact my career in the future? And then what do you think? You can make some notes. Toolbox tip number 45. We should be open minded because there's always another way. Why it matters? High impact people don't simply look for a solution to a problem, they look for the best solution. They leverage the minds of all the people on their team. They know these truths. None of us is as smart as all of us. None of us is as creative as all of us. What we do, we open new doors in new places. We do new things. We do old things in new ways. We remain curious. We ask lots of questions. We meet new people. We share ideas and seek out new ideas. We learn from multiple sources. We aim to complete our teammates, not to compete with our teammates. We leverage multiple minds instead of just our own. What we don't do, we don't attempt to learn from only a few sources. We don't think our way is the only way. We don't think our way is always the right way. We don't limit input from others. Bad example. When we're working on a project and someone offers a suggestion, we don't slow down to consider it or why the suggestion was made in the first place. We refuse to listen to those who think different than we do. Think about this. Mindset change is not about picking up a few pointers here and there. It's about seeing things in a new way. That quote is from Carol S. Dweck. Ask yourself, do I ever reject input from others? Do I resist learning from people who aren't like me? Can I disagree with someone in one area but learn from them in another area? Have I been limiting myself by rejecting others' ideas based on their age, background, education? How do I feel when others won't listen to me? If I don't listen to others, am I any different than those who won't listen to me? What do you think? All right, the last tip, toolbox tip number 60. We should be relentless because until we quit, we haven't failed. Why it matters. Becoming a high impact individual isn't easy. It's hard. Transformation doesn't happen in a day. It happens daily. What we do, we intentionally move forward on purpose for a purpose. We intentionally do something every day to get better. We measure ourselves against our potential, not our peers. What we don't do, we don't allow others to hold us back. We don't allow the negative opinions of others to slow us down. We don't give up and we don't give in. We don't let the fear of failure hold us back. Bad example, quitting when it gets hard. Thinking life will simply get better with very little intentional effort. Waiting to get started. Hoping and wishing instead of deciding and doing. Doing what everyone else is doing to get ahead, which is usually very little. Keeping the same values and expecting things to change. Think about this. If we succeed, it will not be because of what we have, but it will be because of what we are. Not because of what we own, but rather because of what we believe. That quote was from Lyndon B. Johnson. Ask yourself, what's the most important thing I need to do? The one thing that if I don't do it, nothing else matters. Why haven't I already done it? What's stopping me from doing it? What values are holding me back? When will I take action? What's one thing I can start doing every day to get a little better slowly and methodically? What do you think? So we've covered the 6 lessons. And again, those 6 lessons, you actually can get them in print. You go to bluecollarleadership.com/download and you can read them right there. You don't have to put in an email or subscribe to anything. I'm not going to spam you. I don't believe in all that. But you can actually see it. You can download it, print it, download a PDF, mail it to your friends, your teammates, see what they think, mail it to your boss, see if you can get them to buy you some books. You can buy some books and start the drip with your team. I hope you enjoyed this little lesson. You can see how there's a lot of good content in just a few words. This little book is full of gold. So check it out. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Talk to you next time.
Make it happen or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mac Story's Blue Collar Leadership series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mac's books, programs, special offers, certifications, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.